Thank you so much, Induji and Bharti. I hope the audience understands better now the larger context in which this conference is happening. Part of that larger context is, of course, encounters with Hinduphobia on college campuses. As many of you know, Hindu students at Rutgers University have faced repeated encounters with Hinduphobia at their school. Rutgers Hindu Students Council was the host of the first Understanding Hinduphobia Conference last year and was instrumental in successfully passing the first ever resolution to combat Hinduphobia at any university campus. Through the Rutgers University Student Assembly this year, to help create a deeper recognition of Hinduphobia and how it affects Hindu students, staff, and faculty members at Rutgers, the Rutgers HSC applied for and was granted the Idea Innovation Grant, as well as the Beloved Community Grant through Rutgers Office of Diversity. This grant invited the Understanding Hinduphobia initiative for 2 events on campus. The following presentation is a reenactment of a live presentation given to Rutgers administrators as part of this grant on March 10th, earlier this year. The presenters you'll see on screen shortly are Prasiddha Sudhakar, External President of Rutgers HSC, and Rutgers HSC Executive Board members, Samir Patki, Krishna Desai, Anisha Jagdeep, Ankita Jagdeep, and Anika Palande. They are joined by Dr. Viswanathan and Dr. Parihar. This presentation gives us a 360-degree view of Hinduphobia as it is experienced by students on campus and around the world. Let's watch.
Welcome to Rutgers Hindu Students Council Navigating Hinduphobia workshop, hosted by Rutgers HSC and also at the Understanding Hinduphobia Conference. My name is Prasiddha Sudhakar and I'm the External President of Rutgers HSC. We would like to begin by saying thank you. Rutgers HSC is very honored to have won the Beloved Community Grant as well as the Idea Innovation Grant from the Rutgers Office of Diversity. We would also like to thank Understanding Hinduphobia scholars, Dr. Indu Viswanathan and Dr. Parth Parihar for working with us so closely on making events like this possible.
Namaste. My name is Samir, and we'd also like to express our gratitude to everyone for coming out to the 2nd annual Understanding Hinduphobia Conference. This event is about bringing the community together, so we're really looking forward to our dialogue together today.
Now, when you first hear of the word Hindu, what is some of the words and phrases that come to mind? Well, you may have heard of things that happen on campus like Diwali, some of our very popular events, and others like Holi, but one part of our culture that doesn't get represented as much is some of the issues that we face as a community. Now we see words of Hindutva, caste, nationalism, supremacy, and while a lot of this is very difficult to navigate, we'd like to start by beginning basically by defining a set of words and definitions that we will be using throughout the presentation.
So as Prasiddha mentioned, before we delve into the presentation, I would like to share our definitions for 4 terms that will appear multiple times throughout the session. First up is Hinduism. Some Hindus refer to Hinduism as Sanatana Dharma, meaning eternal order. Hinduism embraces different interconnected traditions and practices that emerged from India. And these traditions are pre-Abrahamic and ecocentric, which is why we can recognize Hinduism as an indigenous tradition. Next, I want to discuss a very important word that pertains to this session, Hinduphobia. Hinduphobia is a set of antagonistic, destructive, and derogatory attitudes and behaviors towards Sanatana Dharma. Hinduphobic rhetoric reduces the entirety of Sanatana Dharma to a rigid, oppressive, and regressive tradition. The complete range of Hinduphobic acts extends from microaggressions to genocide. For more information, I encourage you to visit understandinghinduphobia.org. Now we have the term Hindutva. Now this is a controversial term that consists of 2 parts, Hindu and Tva, which roughly translates to Hinduness. If you were to ask a villager in India if they are a villager that is a practicing Hindu, that is, if they are Hindutva, they would likely answer yes. During the time that India was seeking independence after several years of colonization, Hindutva was used as a way to unify a diverse population that had been divided by the British to control us. This idea of unity is now weaponized against us. There is a very narrow and charged definition of Hindutva that's used to depict Hindus as diversity-hating religious extremists. No Hindus we know, including the ones on this campus, relate to that definition of Hindutva.
Now, we'd actually like to begin with a video from last year's Understanding Hinduphobia Conference, and just as a warning, this can be disturbing for some of our viewers.
As a member of Congress, I introduced a resolution that called for the protection of Hindus and religious minorities in Bangladesh, people who continue to be targeted and persecuted to this day. Now, the height of this persecution actually began 50 years ago when the Pakistani army systematically murdered, raped, and drove from their homes millions of Bengali Hindus because of their religion and ethnicity. March 25th, 1971 was the beginning of a systematic targeting of Hindus in Bangladesh by the Pakistani military. It began in Hindu neighborhoods and villages, first at Jagannath Hall, which was a Hindu dormitory in Dhaka University, where 5,000 to 10,000 people were killed on that first night alone. This genocidal campaign continued for 10 months. Resulting in 2 to 3 million people killed, hundreds of thousands of women and girls raped, and more than 10 million forced to flee their homes. U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy went to visit the Bangladeshi refugees at that time and said, quote, "Nothing is more clear or more easily documented than the systematic campaign of terror and its genocidal consequences launched by the Pakistan Army on the night of March 25th. Hardest hit have been members of the Hindu community who have been robbed of their lands and shops, systematically slaughtered, and in some places, painted with yellow patches marked H." End of quote. Now, the Islamist, not to be confused with Islam, the Islamist persecution of Hindus and other religious minorities in Bangladesh didn't end with Bangladesh's independence. That campaign continues to this day with horrific targeted attacks, murders, homes being burned down, and families who continue to be forced to flee. In the early 1900s, Hindus made up roughly 33% of the Bangladesh population. Because of this persistent Islamist campaign targeting Hindus, just 8% of Bangladesh's population are Hindus today. Just a few days ago, in Bangladesh, hundreds of hardline Islamist extremists attacked Hindu temples, destroyed a train, set fire to government buildings, the press club, and public buses, leaving dead and injured behind. Unfortunately, the Islamists' campaign of terror against Hindus, other religious minorities, secularists, atheists, and others in Bangladesh is not unique. It's been going on for centuries. Afghanistan was a very multi-religious country which included Hindus, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, and more prior to the Islamist takeover. Today, it is estimated there are around 1,000 Hindus who remain. Religious minorities make up less than 1% of Afghanistan's population.
Now, take a moment to reflect about the video in the chat. What are you feeling and what are you thinking? We actually want to rewind a little bit back to July of 2021, which was when the South Asia Scholar Activist Collective released the Hindutva Harassment Field Manual. This was shared among South Asian studies departments across the country, as well as several other academic institutions. Now, what does the Hindutva Harassment Field Manual actually say? Let's take a look. Members of the Hindu right often accuse scholars who refuse to advance politically motivated fictions about the South Asian past, specifically invented atrocities committed on Hindu subjects or civilians by Muslim rulers or armies, of atrocity denial. This is a powerful accusation due to real problems with genocide denial regarding the Holocaust. The Hindu right relies upon a politics of grievance in which they invent mythological atrocities in the past divided along religious lines that only became operative in modern times in order to justify their all too real atrocities in the present day. Such violence is increasingly deadly for non-Hindu religious minorities. Hinduphobia, a recently coined term popularized by far-right groups to claim systematic and targeted discrimination against Hindus for being Hindu. Hinduphobia rests on the false notion that Hindus have faced systematic oppression throughout history. In many cases, those who claim to be victims of Hinduphobia are engaged in discrimination against others of South Asian descent, including Muslims, lower castes, Dalits, Christians, and progressive Hindus. Hinduphobia relies on flawed analogies with anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, though these are very different. The anti-Semitic ideology of Nazism led to the Holocaust. Islamophobic foreign policies over time resulted in the killing of Muslims across the world, including in South Asia, as well as the recent anti-Muslim ban of the Trump administration. Anti-Hindu bias, on the other hand, cannot be easily linked to casualties on such horrific scales. Now, let's take another moment to reflect about those quotes in the chat. What are you feeling and what are you thinking? But unfortunately, this isn't limited to the Hindutva Harassment Field Manual, and in fact, we see that South Asian studies departments across the country, and especially here at home at Rutgers, they've developed consensus amongst the departments that anyone who speaks about Hinduphobia is now some kind of a Hindutva troll, and they've created smart folders to spam or junk anything with the fake word Hinduphobia in it. This immediately creates suspicions about anyone who talks about Hinduphobia and opens the door for labeling and harassment as Hindu nationalists.
It is because of the demonizing of Hinduism that the persecution of Hindu victims, especially those who are not hesitant in revealing their Hindu identity, is ignored or whitewashed. Mainstream media attention is generally not directed towards Hindu victims. There has been little to no coverage of crimes on Hindus in any Western newspaper, although an enormous amount of attention is placed on quote-unquote Hindu terror. The overall image that is painted regarding Hindus is that they are adopting extremist ideas and themselves propagating violence in the name of religion. This kind of biased media coverage creates two kinds of harm: erasing global compassion towards Hindus and creating pain and confusion for Hindus towards our cultural heritage and our community. In 1990, the Kashmiri Hindu Pandits of the Kashmir Valley were ethnically cleansed from their homeland. They were given a warning to convert to Islam, leave the place, or be killed. And about 300,000 Kashmiri Pandits were driven out of their homes or killed. They have not been given justice and even today still live as refugees in their own homeland. Media outlets twisted the event to make it appear that the economic status of the Kashmiri Pandits and their monopoly of high social positions caused hostile relations between the Hindu minority and the Muslim community, thereby giving a justification for the genocide of the Kashmiri Pandits.
A few weeks ago, Whoopi Goldberg publicly stated that the Nazi Holocaust was white-on-white crime. Apart from the fact that she was erasing the genocide of the Roma people, this is obviously a disturbing statement, as Jews were clearly targeted because of their faith. There was public outcry. People immediately saw what was wrong in her statement. NBC even took her off the air temporarily. Goldberg has since educated herself, and her apology was largely accepted by the Jewish American community. As we saw earlier, the Bangladeshi Hindu genocide was a targeted attack by the Pakistani army on the Hindu community. It is a documented fact that 2 to 3 million Hindus were slaughtered, and about 400,000 Hindu women were held captive and raped by the Pakistani army. But this genocide of Hindus is consistently referred to as the Bangladeshi genocide. Hindu persecution is erased by the media, by scholars, by entire conferences, and there is no suspension or public apology. When persecution is erased, it encourages persecution. Last fall, Hindus and Hindu temples across Bangladesh were violently attacked during Durga Puja. It barely registered in Western media. But when Hindus unite and discuss crimes and atrocities committed against our community, we are accused of being political extremists, of being Hindu nationalists or political mouthpieces. The genocide of Hindus is dismissed as a mythical invention.
In January of this year, Lavanya, a 17-year-old Hindu girl in southern India, released a video online detailing the ways in which she had been harassed by officials at her school when she refused to convert to Christianity. She was forced to clean the school restrooms and made to hide her torment. Her parents have also reported that they had been personally contacted by the school to convert. In the video, she clearly stated that she felt she had no other option but to take her own life. And on January 19, sad to say, she did. Despite this, the Times of India, one of the most widely read publications in the country, reported her death without referencing how she was targeted for being Hindu, and this was the reason she took her own life. Like many poor Hindu families in India, Lavanya's family could only provide her an education by sending her to a Christian school, which is funded by money from the West. It is particularly horrifying that Lavanya felt that her only option was to take her own life. But her experience of being bullied for being poor and Hindu while trying to receive an education is not unique, and yet students like Lavanya are not given coverage that they are due in mainstream media.
Hindus have called America home since the late 19th century. You might know that Swami Vivekananda, a great Hindu leader, came to Chicago in 1893 for the World Parliament of Religions. But today, according to the Pew Research Center, only 22% of Americans actually know a practicing Hindu, and we make up just about 1% of the American population. Many of us are immigrants from India or South Asia, and this makes us a micro-minority in the US, both in terms of our ethnicity and our religion. Our tradition is very different than the other three Abrahamic traditions. And for all of these reasons, it's important to us to be able to come together and celebrate our tradition. We want to be able to represent ourselves with members from our own community and to be able to build bridges with members of other American communities. But despite this, Hindu Americans are increasingly finding every one of our institutions under attack. The mere act of congregating, being a Hindu, and celebrating our holidays, or even just sharing our own perspectives about our own traditions, our basic rights are being stigmatized to the point of demonization. We're being demonized just for being a Hindu. In the late 1980s, in this part of New Jersey, there was a gang called the Dot Busters, and they would target Hindus, identifying Hindus by their bindis and then violently attacking us. So in 2022 America, while we may not be being physically attacked, we're still being targeted in America. Everything Hindu was under attack.
In July of 2021, NASA released their application for their fall internship. Now, one of the students that they had showed a photo of who interned with NASA was Pratima Roy, and she had submitted her photo with Hindu gods and goddesses in the background. Now, what was supposed to be a pertinent moment for the Hindu community to feel represented was actually short-lived. Why? Because of social media trolling and harassment. Why does a Hindu kid need to be surrounded by gods and goddesses? Can't we do anything without them? This is a NASA ad, and the question is to NASA, why has it selected this photo? Well, this isn't just from any random individual, but in fact, a university professor. And unfortunately, these aren't the only comments. Pratima was then called a right-wing Hindu kid with right-wing Hindu gods in the picture, and then somehow a extremist and terrorist Hindu and declared subhuman, only just for this photograph. And here is actually just a remaining of a few other samples. Remaining of a few other samples of tweets that was underneath this NASA tweet, and it was just because she had posted this photograph.
So for those of you who don't know, Holi is a Hindu festival that celebrates prosperity and well-being through community spirit, color, and loads of fun. It is celebrated in the springtime all over India, especially in the more agrarian communities during the peak of the wheat harvest. Holi is an inclusive tradition with people transcending all boundaries of class, gender, religion, etc., to gather together to play with colorful powder. It is firmly believed that no one should be left out of this auspicious festival. Holi Against Hindutva was a campaign started by students at Yale University along with support from outside groups in early 2020. The campaign was started in response to the Citizenship Amendment Act in India. While these groups have the right to protest against any piece of political legislation, the group was using a popular and sacred Hindu festival like Holi for political propaganda. And while these groups are South Asian, their target is almost always Hinduism. Facts are exaggerated, incidents are hyped up, and the truth is twisted as evidence that shows India and Hinduism as fascist oppressors of minorities and women. For instance, one of the organizations supporting Holi Against Hindutva published an essay claiming Holi was a casteist holiday where upper caste Hindus celebrate the burning of a Bahujan or lower caste woman. There is no truth at all in this claim. In fact, this holiday is incredibly important to all Hindu communities and does not even require the presence of a priest. But facts don't matter. Groups like Holi Against Hindutva consider Hindu Dharma an oppressive and fascist religion and hide their real target, which is Hinduism, under the label of Hindutva. An argument that such groups propose is that they're against Hindutva and not Hinduism. However, their actions prove otherwise. Many newspaper outlets and blogs have already shown examples of how Hindu symbols have been blatantly disrespected by such anti-Hindu activists and groups. For example, some activists use the sacred Hindu symbol of Om to resemble a Nazi Hakenkreuz, along with profane posters used to describe Hinduism. In another example, in a series of protests against CANRC, people from the San Francisco Bay Area here in the US to many states in India linked the cow to these protests by holding signs saying, "The cow ate my documents, so I ate the cow." And while they could have used other phrases or symbols to protest against a piece of legislation that they don't personally agree with, they deliberately chose the cow, knowing very well of its importance to Hindus. So the point we want to drive home is it just not possible for these activists to say anything without smearing Hindu symbols, gods, and festivals? Ask yourself, is their real target a political ideology or Hinduism itself? Everything Hindu is under attack.
Stigma arising from relentlessly connecting Hinduism with political extremism is very powerful. Even when it isn't truthful, this kind of stigma can make students feel isolated and unheard, especially when they are living outside of their parents' homes for the first time. In college, Hindus may feel targeted, especially since so much of the mainstream curriculum confounds Hindu ideas with political tensions and social problems. Academic institutional bias is rampant, our tradition is reduced and vilified, and we do not have the space or the platform to dissent or hear other points of view. Hindu students witness this mass consumption of material that disparages Hinduism or ignores the nuances and diversity contained within its traditions. Some of us find ourselves confused and in pain, especially knowing that our peers are being taught to despise what is most beloved to us in the name of academic freedom and social justice. This graphic, created by a Rutgers professor, is an example of how organizations representing and working for the welfare of the Hindu community are targeted without any proof. These accusations, while xenophobic, are made in the guise of standing up against intolerance and hate. It is routine to cast Hindu American organizations that educate the broader community about Hinduphobia, speak about Hindu persecution, and advance the interests of our community as part of a collective, dangerous, and overseas mission with the objective of taking over public institutions. This same script has played out to other minorities in the US many times before. But when a professor accuses your student organization of being tied to foreign actors, and you know it isn't true, what are you supposed to do? What do you do when you know people will believe her and not you? This question becomes all the more important because the words of academics and intellectuals carry a lot of weight. The constant, unsubstantiated vilification of Hindu Americans encourages broad-based disdain and scorn towards the wider Hindu community, which eventually manifests into prejudice, into Hinduphobia. Any attempt by Hindus to embrace their rich past and affirm their civilizational heritage becomes an issue requiring urgent intervention because of the supposed looming threat we and our traditions represent. As a result, even efforts to speak for the Hindu victims of incessant persecution in South Asia become drowned out in this manufactured chaos of politics and propaganda. Just like that, an accusation made by someone with power makes you feel powerless.
The attacks on Hinduism and the Hindu American community are institutionalized within academia. Dismantling Global Hindutva, or DGH, was a conference held over 3 days this past fall, September 10th to the 12th, and was officially endorsed by departments at over 50 esteemed universities and 1,000 scholars. The proposed purpose was to, quote, understand the complex and multifaceted phenomenon of Hindutva. In the eyes of the organizers, Hindutva is a radicalized, extremist political movement. So what was this conference really promoting? Let's take a look.
Are the panelists saying that the caste system is inseparable from Hinduism? And if that is the case, then why not dismantle Hinduism and not just Hindutva?
Hindutva project is not merely the control of the BJP. Hindutva project is to actually spread the tentacles of Hinduism in every society.
These guys are corporate malignant Brahmins, as I call Sundar Iyer and Ramana Kompella. These last names, Iyers, Kompella, Trivedi, Sharmas, Mukherjees, and so on, they seem to be violent advocates of this kind of malignant Brahminism, which we need to talk about. So my question is, have we ever dealt with Brahminism and the connection between Brahminism and Nazism in a lot more theoretical way? I also want to propose probably Brahminism played a very crucial role in the evolution of Nazism.
I take Hindutva as political Hinduism, not a distortion of some inherently benign religion, but a historical expression of it, with continuities in the works of Dayanand Saraswati, Vivekananda, Aurobindo, and Sarvakar. Even Gandhi.
Whatever may Hindus say, actually, it does not make a difference that Hinduism is a danger to independence, equality, and brotherhood. Thus, it is the enemy of democracy. The idea that Hinduism per se is harmless and only Hindutva is the culprit will not do any good to the observance of the lofty ideals, democratic ideals.
Without hesitation that Hindutva is indeed inseparable from Hinduism, and arguments of Hindutva is not Hinduism are deeply dangerous, Brahmanical, and laced with erasure and violence.
When Durga Puja trends, hashtag Durga Puja, to trend hashtag Mahishasura caste oppression.
Hindutva is in fact Hinduism. We believe strongly that we must begin not by denying the Hinduness of Hindutva.
I did not at least hear anyone, definitely myself, deny the fact that Hinduism is deeply imbricated with Hindutva. Nobody on this panel will deny it.
Dismantling Global Hindutva tried to give the impression that the scholars and supporters of the conference were not against Hinduism, but only opponents of Hindutva. But as we have seen, the many, many examples of their own words disprove this idea. It is unambiguously bigoted to argue for the destruction of Hinduism itself. It is dangerously illiberal to claim that anyone with a particular last name is a corporate malignant Brahmin. It is undeniably xenophobic to argue that Hinduism, a religion practiced by millions of Americans, is a threat to freedom and democracy, and to label the immigration of Hindus to this country as, quote, Hinduism spreading its tentacles around the world. And when top universities, including Rutgers, lend their credibility and sponsorship to this conference, this is exactly what we mean when we say that Hinduphobia is being institutionalized. But it gets worse. When Hindu American organizations and students, like those presenting to you here today, bring these concerns to universities, we're often the ones who are labeled extremists. Unfortunately, administrators at some universities talked past students' concerns and reiterated the conference's boilerplate claim verbatim that the conference was criticizing, quote, Hindutva and not Hinduism. But as we've seen, that is undeniably false. The conference itself posted a graphic you can see on the screen, pathologizing us, accusing Hindus with concerns about DGH of suffering from the, quote, Hindutva virus. As we've seen, this is a pattern of ad hominem attack used against anyone who speaks about Hinduphobia. Think about the message that sends to us and to our community. Why don't people believe us or take us seriously? Think about the impact of this constant gaslighting. Speaking about Hinduphobia often feels like howling into the wind.
Now we'll return to the definition of Hinduphobia. Hinduphobia is a set of antagonistic, destructive, and derogatory attitudes and behaviors towards Sanatana Dharma and Hindus that may manifest as prejudice, fear, or hatred. Hinduphobic rhetoric reduces the entirety of Sanatana Dharma to a rigid, oppressive, and regressive tradition. All of these aforementioned examples, both the big and the small, all connect to Hinduphobia. Hinduphobia might start small. It could be hateful remarks directed at a student for having their murtis or images of God. It could be about students celebrating their faith, or they can be larger, more organized attempts to misappropriate our festivals, such as Holi, for people's political propaganda. Or it can even be on the scale of a systematic, large-scale denial by academics that atrocities and genocides ever do happen to Hindus. And now, all of us in Hindu Students Council, both our general and future members, are falsely being labeled as extremists within some international network of hatred just for being Hindu. All of us do sincerely believe that there is a room for dialogue, and that's why we are all here. And we all can do better, ourselves included. But when Hindus are left out of initiatives or talks of future progress, or we're labeled as some foreign agents of a political party, we have to be honest in addressing why this is a problem. We see that in other cases when academics make false, bigoted claims about other cultures or religions, or if they deny and whitewash other genocides, they rightfully get called out. And then a larger conversation starts about why what they said is a problem and why what they said is factually incorrect. But up until now, this has not happened for Hindus. This is not about asking for special treatment. Rather, it's about having the same level of academic integrity and respect. So in order to have that, we're looking forward to having more dialogues together in the future. To learn more, please visit understandinghinduphobia.org. Thank you.
For the latest on our YouTube channel, click subscribe and hit the bell icon for alerts on new content. Remember to like, comment, and share our videos. For more about HSC, you can visit the social media handles listed below.